All right, let's be real. If you've ever had a roommate, you know the struggle. The weird habits, the passive-aggressive notes, but what if it goes way beyond that? What if the person you're sharing your life, your home, your safety with, turns out to be something truly, deeply wrong? That gut-wrenching dread that something is off, but you're trapped. Tonight, we're exploring horrific true stories of roommates who weren't just messy, they were dangerous. Prepare yourselves, because these 5 chilling accounts, like the night my roommate's side of the door stayed empty, might make you reconsider who you're living with. If you haven't already, please check if you're subscribed. Every subscription helps us bring more chilling accounts like these true stories to light. The year was 2018, and I was fresh out of college, eager to tackle the world. Problem was, the world tackled back, mostly with astronomical rent prices. So, like countless others, I ended up getting a roommate. His name was Arthur. We found each other on one of those online roommate portals. His profile was sparse. No photo, just a basic description. Quiet, clean, works evenings. Sounded perfect for my early morning schedule. The apartment itself was a decent 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, nothing fancy, but affordable. We signed the lease sight unseen, trusting the landlord's photos moving in day was uneventful. Arthur was already there, his side of the living room surprisingly bare, just a small armchair and a floor lamp. He was a lanky guy, almost painfully thin, with deep-set eyes that seemed to take everything in without giving much back. He rarely smiled, his default expression a sort of tired neutrality. We exchanged pleasantries, split the chores, and settled into a routine, and it was a routine. Arthur really was quiet, unnervingly so. I barely heard him move. His door, perpetually closed, seemed to absorb all sound. He worked at some kind of data entry job, he said, from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. This meant our paths rarely crossed. I'd be making coffee as he stumbled in, a shadow in the dim hallway light, and by the time I returned from work, he'd already be gone. At first, I appreciated the peace. No loud music, no late-night parties. My previous roommates had been less considerate, but as weeks turned into months, Arthur's silence began to feel less like peace and more like an absence. He was there, technically, but his presence was almost imperceptible. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and listen. Nothing. Not a creak, not a rustle. Just the drone of distant traffic and the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. This quiet, I realized, was what first unsettled me. It wasn't just a lack of sound, it was an unnatural void. He never had friends over. Never received phone calls. I never saw him eat. His portion of the fridge remained strangely empty, save for a single carton of almond milk that seemed to last for weeks. I started trying to engage him, small talk mostly. How was work, Arthur? Good. Anything interesting happen? No. Conversations died quicker than a houseplant in winter, then came the smells. Or rather, the lack of them. People have a smell, don't they? A subtle scent of laundry detergent, of shampoo, of skin. Arthur had nothing. He smelled like recycled air, like something that had been vacuum sealed. Not bad, just neutral. It was another layer of his imperceptibility, another subtle detail that chipped away at my sense of normalcy. One evening, I was cooking dinner, the scent of garlic and onions filling the kitchen. Arthur emerged from his room, heading for the door. "Oh hey," I said cheerily. "Smells good, right?" He paused just for a moment, his head cocked slightly, as if trying to decipher a foreign language. "Yes," he said flatly, and then he was gone. It struck me then that he registered the smell, but there was no reaction. No anticipation, no hunger, just recognition. The real unease started with the breathing, or my inability to hear his. I considered myself a light sleeper. The slightest noise would jar me awake. Yet I never once heard Arthur breathe. Not a snore, not a sigh, not even the shallow whisper of air moving in and out. I'd lie in bed, listening, straining my ears in the profound silence of our apartment. Nothing, it became an obsession. I'd sometimes stand outside his closed door, holding my own breath, just to confirm the eerie stillness within. Then, there were the times I'd pass his room, and the door would be slightly ajar. Just enough to catch a glimpse of the corner of his bed, and I noticed something. The covers were rarely disturbed, always pristine, tightly tucked, as if no one had slept there. Yet he was always there in the mornings, heading out to work. One particularly sweltering August night, our ancient building's air conditioning decided to give up the ghost. I woke up drenched in sweat. I could hear other residents grumbling, doors opening and closing. I got up, hoping to catch a breeze from the window. As I passed Arthur's room, I noticed his door was open wider than usual. Not fully, but enough for me to see more of the room. It was stark. No posters, no personal effects. Just a bed, a dresser, and a desk, and Arthur, he was lying on his back in bed, completely motionless. His hands lay by his sides, his eyes staring straight up at the ceiling, unblinking. His chest was still. Absolutely, perfectly still. No rise and fall. No gentle undulation that accompanies sleep. He looked like a mannequin. My breath hitched. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, a cold dread washing over me despite the oppressive heat. I watched him for a full minute, maybe more. Not a twitch. Not a single, solitary breath. 1,000 explanations flashed through my mind. Maybe he was holding his breath, sleep apnea, but the stillness felt too absolute, too unnatural. He looked dead. A silent scream built in my throat. I felt an illogical, primal urge to shake him, to force a response, to prove he was alive. Just as I was about to burst into a full-blown panic, his chest gave one sudden, deep heave. It was an almost convulsive movement, like a machine sputtering into life before settling into a slow, almost imperceptible rhythm. His eyes remained fixed on the ceiling. It wasn't the natural, effortless breathing of a living person. It was forced, and then, slowly, his chest stilled again, becoming unnervingly still once more. I stumbled back to my room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene. He stopped breathing, for minutes. Then he forced one single breath. The next morning, I was a wreck. Arthur emerged from his room, silent as ever, headed for the door. "Arthur," I managed, my voice raspy. "Are you feeling okay?" He turned his head slowly, those deep-set eyes meeting mine. There was no flicker of understanding, no concern. "Yes," he said, the word flat, expressionless. And then he was gone. I couldn't live there anymore. The silence, the lack of scent, the perfectly undisturbed bed, the forced breath, the unblinking stare, it all clicked into place, creating a terrifying picture of something other than human. I saw him, truly saw him, not as a quiet roommate, but as something mimicking life. Something that didn't need to breathe, but did, just enough to keep up the charade. I gave my notice that day. I told the landlord I had a family emergency. Arthur was just as impassive when I told him I was leaving. "Okay," he said. That was it. I moved out 2 weeks later. The apartment felt impossibly heavy on my shoulders as I carried my last box out. Arthur was gone, at work probably. I locked the door and didn't look back. I've never seen him since. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is still, I find myself holding my breath, listening. Just listening, and I wonder if Arthur is out there in some other apartment, perfectly still, perfectly quiet, perfectly not breathing, waiting for someone else to notice. I know what he is, or rather, what he isn't. And that knowledge, that lingering whisper of an unnatural presence, stays with me, a chilling secret I shared with my silent roommate. It was my final year of college, and I thought I had the roommate lottery won when Liam moved in. He was quiet, tidy, and seemed to spend most of his time either in the library or at his girlfriend's place. Our tiny 2-bedroom apartment, just off campus, felt less like a dorm and more like a peaceful sanctuary. For the first few months, our biggest disagreements were about whose turn it was to take out the recycling. Then the habit started. Or more accurately, the habit. It began subtly, barely noticeable. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching sound. I'd be drifting off to sleep, the hum of the city outside our window a familiar lullaby when I'd hear it. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like fingernails against wood, but muffled, as if coming from a distance. I'd usually chalk it up to the old building settling, or maybe a mouse in the walls grim, but plausible. After a few weeks, the scratching intensified. It wasn't just at the edge of my hearing anymore, it was distinct. And it always happened after midnight. I remember one particular night, I was actually still awake, cramming for a midterm. It was almost 1 a.m. The apartment was still, save for the rhythmic clack of my laptop keys. Then, from Liam's room, it started. Scritch, scritch, scratch, thumpy, scritch, scritch, scratch, thump. It wasn't a mouse. This was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It sounded like something being dragged across the floor, then lifted and dropped, then dragged again. My heart started to thump in a matching rhythm. What on earth was Liam doing? He was usually asleep by 11 p.m. I listened, my breath held tight in my chest. The sounds continued for maybe 20 minutes, then abruptly stopped. A moment later, I heard the distinctive creak of his bed springs. He was going to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, he seemed completely normal. A little tired, perhaps, but who wasn't in college? I debated bringing it up, but how do you casually ask, "Hey, are you dragging dead bodies around your room after midnight?" I decided against it. Maybe he was moving furniture, reorganizing. It was a one-off. I told myself it wasn't. The sounds became a nightly occurrence. Scritch, scritch, thump. Sometimes there'd be a low, guttural sigh mixed in, almost a moan. It sent shivers down my spine every time. I started setting a timer on my phone, counting the minutes it went on. Sometimes it was half an hour, other times it stretched to 45. Sleep became a luxury, a restless, fitful thing punctuated by these eerie nocturnal mechanics next door. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had a secret hobby, carpentry, though the sounds weren't really indicative of woodworking. Maybe he was having nightmares, night terrors even, but the sounds were too physical, too sustained for that one afternoon. Liam left for an early class, forgetting his wallet. I knew he'd need it for lunch, so I grabbed it from his desk drawer and went to drop it off for him in the common room before he left. As I walked past the closed door of his bedroom, something caught my eye. The bottom of his door, the part that was usually flush with the floor, was slightly warped. Not just a little bit, but visibly uneven, as if someone had been pressing against it, or dragging something heavy across the threshold repeatedly. A tiny line of faint, almost invisible scratches ran along the bottom edge, too. My stomach churned. This wasn't some dream. This wasn't the building. This was coming from his room. That night, the sounds were louder than ever. I was lying in bed, eyes wide open in the darkness. Scritch, scritch, thump. It seemed to be moving closer to my wall. I could almost feel the vibrations through the shared wall. My mind raced, conjuring up the most grotesque images. What if he was digging or burying something? The absurdity of the thought didn't stop the icy fear gripping me. I gripped my pillow, a sudden impulse to knock on his door, to demand an explanation. But what if he opened it? What if I saw something? What if he knew I was listening? The thought paralyzed me. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had classes all day, but I spent every moment strategizing. I decided to wait until he was definitely out. When I heard his key turn in the lock and the front door click shut behind him around 9 a.m., I practically leapt out of bed. I stood outside his door, heart pounding like a drum. The warped wood, the faint scratches along the bottom, they seemed more prominent now, like cruel evidence. I tried the handle. Locked, of course. My rational mind was screaming at me to walk away, to leave it alone. My terrified, sleep-deprived mind was telling me I would go insane if I didn't find out. I knew Liam kept a spare key hidden under a loose floorboard in the hall closet. We all did for emergencies. My hand trembled as I found it. The cold metal key felt heavy in my palm. I slipped it into the lock, the click sounding deafeningly loud in the silent apartment. I pushed the door open, just a crack, and peered inside. The room was neat, almost unnervingly so. His bed was made desk tidy, clothes put away. No huge mounds of dirt, no tools, no strange contraptions. It looked normal. My shoulders sagged with a mixture of relief and frustration. Had I imagined it all? Was I just going crazy from lack of sleep? Then, my eyes drifted to the far corner of the room, behind his tall bookcase. It was a dark, somewhat obscured space. As I took a step inside, a faint, sickly sweet smell reached me. Not overwhelming, but distinctly earthy, a bit organic. My gaze sharpened on the floor, nestled against the wall, was a large, heavy-duty tarpaulin folded neatly. Too neatly. And on top of it, meticulously arranged, were a series of bones. Not human bones, I told myself, my breath catching in my throat. Please, not human bones. They were animal bones, all different sizes, some bleached white, some still with dark, clinging bits. Small ones, like a cat's skull, larger ones that resembled a small dog's femur, and even some that looked like the vertebrae of a larger rodent. And then I saw it. The tool, a large, thick rock, smooth on one side, jagged on the other, resting on a worn cloth. And behind it, a small, intricate drawing on a piece of paper, half hidden by a curtain. It was a crude but detailed sketch of a creature. A grotesque, multi-limbed thing, its body a patchwork of different animal parts, stitched together like some macabre Frankenstein suddenly. The scratching sounds, the dragging, the thumps, the low moans, it all clicked into place. The warped door, the strange smell, the hours after midnight. He wasn't burying anything. He was building something. He was pulling bones out, rearranging them, piecing them together. The thumps were pieces dropping into place. The scritches were him dragging larger bones across the floor. The low sighs, were they sighs of concentration? Or something more chilling, something of satisfaction? A wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to scream, to run. But I was frozen, my eyes fixed on that horrifying sketch, on the bones. Just then I heard the faint click of the front door again. Liam, he must have forgotten something. My blood ran cold. There was no time to replace the key, no time to close the door and make my escape. He was coming down the hall, my mind raced. What could I say? How could I explain why I was in his room, staring at his macabre collection? Then I heard his footsteps pause outside the door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate bird trapped in a cage. The silence stretched, unbearable. Can I help you? His voice was perfectly calm, almost gentle. But there was an underlying tremor, a hint of something just beneath the surface. I slowly turned my head, my eyes locking with his. His gaze was unsettlingly blank, but his lips were curved into the faintest, most unsettling smile. He wasn't startled. He wasn't angry. He looked expectant. As if he'd been waiting for me to discover his secret all along. The bones seemed to hum in the corner, the air in the room suddenly thick and heavy. If the chilling idea of a vacant space where someone should be gives you pause, hit the like button. It lets us know you're here for these unsettling narratives. It was late August, the kind of summer night in the city where the heat still clung to the brick buildings even after the sun had dipped below the horizon. But a faint, almost imperceptible coolness hinted at the approaching autumn. My roommate Chloe and I were sprawled on our worn, second-hand couch, sharing a large pizza and trying to decide which terrible romantic comedy to put on. Our apartment, a cozy two-bedroom on the third floor of an old building just outside downtown, felt like home. It had its quirks, the perpetually dripping faucet in the bathroom, the way the floorboards creaked like a symphony of sighs whenever you walked down the hall, but it was our space. We'd been living there for a little over a year. Chloe and I had been friends since college, and moving in together had been a natural progression. We had our routines, our inside jokes, the comfortable rhythm of two lives intertwined but still distinct. Nights like these, all quiet laughter and easy conversation, were pretty typical. "'Kay, but seriously," Chloe said, swiping a pepperoni slice, "When Harry Met Sally is a classic. You can't deny it." I scoffed. "It's fine, but Sleepless in Seattle has more charm. Plus, Tom Hanks." The TV glowed, casting a gentle, shifting light into the living room. The windows were open, letting in the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren. It was a normal, beautiful Friday night. That was the first time I noticed it. A flicker at the edge of my vision that I immediately dismissed as a trick of the light from the screen. It was just a brief, almost imperceptible darkening in the hallway that led to our bedrooms, a shadow deeper than the shadows already pooling there. I blinked, glanced at it, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual dimness, maybe, Chloe conceded, but Meg Ryan's hair in Harry Met Sally? Iconic. We talked movies for a while longer, finished the pizza, and eventually decided on something utterly forgettable. As the credits rolled, I stood up to stretch, feeling the stiffness in my neck. I walked over to the windows, looking out at the city lights. Then I turned off the living room light, leaving only the soft glow from the hallway lamp we usually kept on until we went to bed. That's when I saw it again. More clearly this time, just at the mouth of the hallway, where it met the living room, there was a shadow. Not static and flat against the wall, but somehow fuller. It was taller than either Chloe or I, stretching almost to the ceiling, and it seemed to have a vague, human-like outline. It stood there for a beat, maybe two, before it seemed to recede, melting back into the general darkness of the hall, like a ripple in still water my breath caught. "Chloe," I whispered, / "did you see that?" / Chloe had been gathering the pizza box. She looked up, startled. "See, the hall," I said, my voice a little shaky. A shadow. It was really big." She peered into the semi-darkness, then looked back at me, a playful smirk on her face. "Are you finally losing it?" "Too much late-night pizza?" I shook my head, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "No, I swear, it was right there." She just shrugged. "Probably just your eyes adjusting to the dark. Come on, let's call it a night." I didn't argue. I tried to convince myself she was right, that my brain was playing tricks. But as I lay in bed, the familiar creaks and groans of the building seemed to take on a new, unsettling quality. Every whisper of the wind outside, every faint rumble of the city made me jump. My imagination, usually a friend, was now my enemy, painting shadowy figures in every corner of my room. Over the next few days, it happened more frequently, and not just to me. "Hey," Chloe said one morning, casually, as she poured herself a coffee. "Did one of your shirts fall off the rack in your closet? I swear, I saw something dark lying on the floor in there when I walked past." My closet door was always shut, and my clothes were always neatly folded or hung. I felt a prickle of unease. "No, everything's where it should be." "Why?" She just shrugged. "Oh, just a weird thought. Must have been the way the light was hitting it. Oh, by the way, did you leave the bathroom light on all night?" My stomach tightened. "No, I always turn it off. We had a rule, last one out turns off the lights." It was a small thing, but we were both pretty good about it. It started small, these little anomalies. My keys, which I always left on the hook by the door, would sometimes be on the kitchen counter instead. The front door, which we always deadbolted, would sometimes be only latched when one of us remembered checking it earlier. Our mugs, left to dry on the dish rack, would be rearranged differently. Little things, easily dismissed as forgetfulness or just odd. Then came the sounds, soft, almost inaudible shuffling from the living room at 3 in the morning. A faint, dragging sound from the kitchen, like something being pulled across the linoleum, gone the moment I jolted awake. Whispers that seemed to drift from the empty hallway, so indistinct they could have been the wind, but felt more deliberate. One evening, Chloe and I were curled up on the couch again, watching TV. The apartment felt warm and safe. I was just about to doze off when I felt a distinct, cold gust of air ruffle my hair, then Chloe's. We both looked up, alarmed. "Did you feel that?" Chloe asked, her eyes wide. I breathed. Like someone just walked past us. The window was closed. There was no breeze. We sat frozen for a moment, then Chloe slowly, reluctantly, turned her head towards the hallway. I followed her gaze, and it was there. Standing at the entrance to our hall, taller and more defined than I'd ever seen it, was the shadow. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was darkness, a deeper void in our home. It had depth, a sort of substantialness to it. An outline, faintly human-shaped, but warped, elongated like a caricature of a person. It seemed to lean slightly, as if observing us, and then, almost as if it had noticed us looking, it moved. It didn't walk, it flowed. It glided down the hallway, melting into the shadows of the doorways towards our bedrooms. It was utterly silent, Chloe and I sprang up from the couch, our hearts hammering against our ribs. What was that?" Chloe stammered, her face pale. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely there. "It's our third roommate." The words felt like a macabre joke, but the dread was very real. Neither of us dared to go down the hallway. We stood huddled together in the living room, the TV still flickering, our eyes glued to the dark expanse of the hall. We spent the rest of the night on the couch, sleeping fitfully, holding on to each other, too terrified to be apart. The next morning, the apartment felt different. Colder, somehow. We found Chloe's favorite mug shattered on the kitchen floor, despite it having been on the counter's edge. My bedroom door was ajar, though I definitely closed it. And then, we saw it. On the dusty surface of my bedside table, amidst the usual clutter, was a single, perfect handprint. Not made of dust, but in the dust, as if a hand had been pressed there, leaving an impression. It was too small to be mine, too wide for Chloe's. And the fingers were unnaturally long and slender. We sold our furniture quickly, packed what we could into our cars, and broke our lease. We didn't care about the money or the hassle. We just needed to get out. We moved into separate apartments across town, unable to bear the thought of sharing a space again after that. Every creak, every shadow, every fleeting draft in our new places sent a shiver down our spines. We often talk about it, trying to rationalize, trying to find a logical explanation. But we never do. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my new, smaller apartment, I still feel a stray gust of cold air or see a fleeting, darker shadow at the edge of my vision. I always turn on all the lights, check every corner. I tell myself it's my imagination, a lingering paranoia from our old place. But then I remember that perfect, small, unnatural handprint on my bedside table, and I wonder, did we really leave it behind? Or did our third roommate decide it liked us so much, it decided to follow? I don't know. And truthfully, I'm too afraid to ever find out. What's one odd habit someone you live with has that, in retrospect, seems a little off, maybe even a little too quiet? Describe it in the comments if you dare. It was early October, the air crisp and carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant bonfires. I remember it so clearly. I was a junior in college, living off campus in a slightly rundown but charming two-bedroom apartment. My roommate, Mark, was a bio major, quiet, diligent, and always up for a late-night study session fueled by stale coffee and cheap pizza. We'd known each other since freshman year, and our living dynamic was easy. We each had our own room, separated by a thin wall and a short stretch of hallway that led to the tiny kitchen. His room was on the left, mine on the right, directly opposite the shared bathroom. That night was like any other. Mark had been holed up in his room since dinner, probably cramming for some organic chemistry exam. I was just finishing up a paper on my laptop around 11 p.m. The only sounds were my furious typing and the low hum of my mini fridge. Then, I heard it, the distinct click of Mark's door opening. I assumed he was heading to the bathroom or maybe to grab a late-night snack from the kitchen. I vaguely heard his footsteps, a light padding that only lasted a few seconds. Too short a time to reach the bathroom or the kitchen. I paused my typing, wondering if he was waiting for me to finish in the bathroom first, even though I hadn't even started brushing my teeth yet. I waited a moment, but there was no further movement, no sound of the bathroom door opening or the kitchen light clicking on. Just silence. It was strange. Usually, if he opened his door, it meant he was fully emerging. I shrugged it off, figured he'd just opened it to let some air in, maybe, and gone back to his desk. I went back to my paper a little later, perhaps nearing midnight. I got up to finally brush my teeth and get ready for bed. As I stepped into the short hallway, I noticed something immediately. Mark's door was wide open, not just ajar. It was fully open, revealing a sliver of his unmade bed and the corner of his desk lamp, which was still on. This was unusual. Mark was meticulous about closing his door when he was in his room, especially late at night. He said it helped him focus. /Mark, I called out softly, my voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet apartment. No answer. /you there? Still nothing. A tiny prickle of unease started to form. It wasn't like him to leave his door wide open and then just disappear. I pushed the door open further, just enough to see inside. His desk lamp cast a warm glow over his textbooks and notebooks, spread open as if he just stepped away for a moment. His chair was pushed back. His bed was unrumpled. Everything was exactly as he would have left it if he just got up to use the bathroom. But the room was empty. My eyes scanned the small space. His phone was on his bedside table, charging. His keys, usually hooked on the peg beside his door, were gone. My mind immediately went to the obvious. He must have stepped out to grab something from the convenience store across the street, or maybe gone to the library for a late-night study session. But why leave his door wide open? And why wouldn't he tell me, even with a quick shout as he left? We usually did. I closed his door, the click echoing a little too loudly in the silence. As I walked to the bathroom, I noticed the front door of our apartment. It was locked, and the deadbolt was engaged. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the double locks. If Mark had gone out, he would have only used the regular lock, not the deadbolt. I was the one who always used the deadbolt when I was the last one in, and I hadn't touched it since I got home hours ago. A wave of genuine unease washed over me. I checked both locks. They were definitely engaged, and then it hit me. I hadn't heard the front door open or close at all since I had been home that evening. Our apartment was small, and the front door creaked like a banshee. There was no way I would have missed it, especially from my room, which was only a few feet away, so Mark hadn't left. But he wasn't in his room, and I had heard his door open earlier, followed by those few footsteps. Just a few steps? Where could he have gone? I went back to his room, my heart starting to thump uncomfortably against my ribs. I tried opening his closet. Empty, just clothes hanging there. I checked under his bed. Nothing. I looked around the room again, slowly, trying to find any sign, any clue. His window was closed and locked from the inside. He wasn't a sleepwalker. He wasn't the type to play pranks. I walked the short hallway again, slowly, deliberately. His open door, the empty room, the locked front door, and the memory of those few footsteps. 1, 2, 3, then silence. What if he hadn't gone out of his room? What if he had only gone a few steps and then disappeared? The concept was absurd, illogical, but a cold, inexplicable dread was starting to set in. I went to the kitchen, nothing out of place. The living room, empty. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to reason it out. Maybe he had an emergency and someone picked him up from outside the window. No, the window was locked. Maybe he jumped out from the second floor and then sealed the window again. It was ridiculous. Every logical explanation was immediately countered by an illogical detail. The next morning, the apartment felt different. The air was heavy, charged with an unsettling quiet. Mark's door was still open. The lamp still on, casting a dim, lonely glow in the morning light. His textbooks still splayed on his desk. I called his phone. It rang from his bedside table, a cheerful, insistent chirping that only made the emptiness feel more profound. I called his parents. They hadn't heard from him. I called the campus police. They took down a report, but without any sign of foul play, they couldn't do much. They assumed he had just walked off, maybe gone home without telling anyone, as college students sometimes do. But I knew better. I knew the locks, the open door, the silent departure days turned into weeks. Mark was officially declared a missing person. His parents were distraught. His room was eventually sealed off by the police for further investigation, though they found nothing, no signs of struggle, no notes, no indication of what had happened. It was as if he had just vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the ghost of his open door and the lingering question of those few, silent footsteps. I ended up moving out of that apartment shortly after. Every time I walked down that short hallway, I could feel the chill radiating from Mark's room. I could see the sliver of his unmade bed, the lamp still on in my memory. And I could hear, distinctly, the soft click of his door opening, followed by those few steps, leading to nowhere to this day. Over a decade later, Mark has never been found. And sometimes, late at night, in the quiet of my own home, I still replay those moments. The open door, the silent apartment, and the terrifying, impossible truth that my roommate's side of the door stayed empty forever. It was late August, the kind of sticky, humid summer night where even the air felt heavy and unwilling to move. I was in my second year of college, living off campus in a slightly rundown but charming old house with 3 other guys. My roomie, Mark, was the quiet type, not antisocial, just reserved. He studied a lot, played guitar softly in his corner of the room, and usually kept to himself. We had a pretty standard roommate dynamic, shared food, took turns with the dishes, respected each other's space. Nothing out of the ordinary. Our room was on the second floor, a decent size with 2 twin beds on opposite walls, 2 desks, and a large, full-length mirror leaning against the wall near the door. It was an antique, with an ornate, dark wooden frame that seemed a little too grand for a student rental. We mostly used it to check if our clothes matched before heading to class, or if our hair wasn't too wild. Harmless that night, I was pulling an all-nighter, trying to finish a paper that was due at dawn. Mark had turned in hours ago, his side of the room a dark, silent silhouette. The only light was the glow from my desk lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls as I typed. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old wood settled in for the night, or the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Around 2 a.m., I needed a break. My eyes were burning and my brain felt like static. I stretched, yawned, and decided to grab a glass of water from the kitchen downstairs. As I stood up, I glanced at the mirror, a Chinese letter, habit I had whenever I moved around the room, and that's when I first saw it. Mark was asleep in his bed, his back to me, covered by his duvet. But in the mirror, clearly visible, was his reflection. He was lying on his back, staring up at the ceiling. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and they were fixed on something above him that I couldn't see. My breath hitched. My first thought was that I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. I rubbed my eyes hard, then looked back. The reflection was still there. Mark, wide-eyed, staring, but his actual body, the one just a few feet away, was still facing the wall, perfectly motionless in the sleep position. A cold dread trickled down my spine. This wasn't right, it was impossible. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I just saw him move in the mirror and then he settled back. No, the mirror image was completely still, almost frozen in its gaze. And the disparity between his actual body and his reflection was stark. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. The silence in the room became oppressive. My heart started to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wanted to turn on the main light, to wake Mark up, to do anything to break the spell. But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot. Then the reflection blinked. Slowly, deliberately, and as it blinked, its head subtly tilted, still staring at the ceiling, but now it felt like it was listening. Or waiting. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run out of the room, out of the house. But the thought of turning my back on that reflection, of not knowing what it was doing, was even more terrifying. Finally, with a surge of adrenaline, I managed to force myself to move. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't try to wake Mark. I just stumbled out of the room, my legs unsteady, and practically fell down the stairs. I burst through the front door, gasping for air in the humid night, and didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, under the halo of a street lamp, shivering despite the warmth. I spent the rest of the night walking the deserted streets, calling a friend to meet me for coffee at 5 a.m., anything to avoid going back. When the sun finally came up, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, I felt a tiny spark of courage. I had to go back. My laptop, my books, my life was in that room. I walked back to the house, heart pounding with every step. The front door was unlocked. I crept inside, the air in the house still and quiet, holding its secrets. I ascended the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood amplifying the sound in my ears. Our room door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open just enough to peek inside. Mark was awake. He was sitting at his desk, headphones on, typing on his computer, completely oblivious. The room looked normal, just like any other morning. The sun streamed in through the window, making the dust motes dance in the air. The mirror stood silently against the wall, reflecting the mundane scene. I walked in, trying to act normal. /morning, Mark / I croaked, my voice a little too high. He looked up, pulling off his headphones. /morning, you're up early. Yeah, paper I lied, gesturing vaguely towards my desk. I avoided looking at the mirror. I couldn't, not after last night. The next few days were a blur of paranoia. I found myself constantly glancing at the mirror, then at Mark. He seemed completely normal, unchanged. But every time I saw his reflection, a wave of nausea washed over me. I started making excuses to be out of the room whenever he was asleep. I'd go to the library, to a friend's place, anywhere but our room after dark. I knew I couldn't tell him what I saw. How do you tell someone that their reflection isn't them? That something else is looking out from the glass, using their face? He'd think I was crazy. A week later, it happened again. It was a Saturday afternoon, bright and sunny. Mark was taking a nap, sprawled out on his bed on his stomach, reading a textbook. I was packing my bag to head to the gym when I caught his reflection in the mirror. This time, it wasn't his body. It was his left arm. In the mirror, his left arm was hanging off the side of the bed, trailing fingers on the floor. But in reality, his arm was tucked neatly beneath his head, resting on the pillow. I gasped, a small, involuntary sound. Mark stirred, groaning. I stared at the mirror. The reflected arm was still there, fingers twitching almost imperceptibly. You okay? Mark mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I snapped my head towards him. Yeah, fine. Just bumped my elbow. I forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. He grunted and settled back down. I didn't go to the gym. I grabbed my bag and headed to the student union, my mind racing. What was happening? Was it just isolated incidents, or was it escalating? I started paying more attention. Discreetly, of course, always out of the corner of my eye. I noticed small things, tiny discrepancies. Sometimes, in the mirror, Mark's hair would be slightly messier than it was in reality, or his shirt collar would be twisted. Fleeting, subtle things that you could easily dismiss, but I knew. I knew what I had seen that first night. The biggest incident came about a month after the first one. It was a Sunday evening, quiet. Mark was on his bed, playing his guitar. I was at my desk, scrolling on my phone. The music was soft, a gentle strumming of chords. I glanced up absently at the mirror. It was directly across from me, and Mark was in its frame. He was playing his guitar, his fingers dancing on the frets, his eyes closed in concentration, a peaceful expression on his face. This was his posture, his expression. Normal, but in the reflection, his playing stopped. His hands froze on the fretboard. His eyes, still closed, began to slowly open. And as they opened, they weren't his kindly, quiet eyes. They were completely black, not dark brown, black, like bottomless pits, and they stared, not at the guitar, not at the ceiling. They stared at me. Directly at my reflection in the mirror, my blood ran cold. The reflected Mark's lips, still closed, stretched into a slow, impossibly wide grin. It wasn't Mark's smile. It was predatory. Malevolent. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My phone dropped from my numb fingers, clattering softly on the desk. The real Mark, still strumming away, looked up, startled by the noise. Everything? He asked, his eyes opening, his normal, kind eyes. As he spoke, the reflection in the mirror flickered. The black eyes were gone. The terrifying grin had vanished. It was just Mark, his reflection once again perfectly mirroring his reality, looking at me with a confused expression. I managed to stammer out, yeah, just dropped my phone. Clumsy me, I forced a weak laugh. He shrugged and went back to his guitar. That was it. That was the last straw. I couldn't live there anymore. I couldn't share a room with that mirror, with whatever was lurking inside it, playing games with my roommate's reflection. I made up an excuse about wanting to live closer to campus, found another place in a hurry, and moved out within a week. I never told Mark why I really left. We're still friends, we see each other around campus, but I always feel a chill when I look at him, remembering those black eyes staring out from the glass sometimes, late at night. I wonder if that antique mirror found a new home. If it's still leaning against a wall in some unsuspecting student's room, waiting for them to catch a glimpse of a discrepancy, a tiny, horrifying crack in reality. And I wonder if Mark still sleeps soundly in that room, unaware that sometimes, in the dead of night, his reflection isn't quite his own. As the lights dim, remember that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we share our lives with. If these stories have resonated with your deepest fears, consider subscribing for more true horror narratives that will truly haunt you. Until next time, stay safe and remember to always check your reflection.